the remaining probably 3 people that are still watching my channel, not that it's much of a channel, but some things happen on here occasionally, I'm back into working on my project car. Made a bit of progress. I can't remember where I left the last video, but extractors are all wrapped now. Pipes are all in, turbos in. I've done the feed and drain lines, and I've just finished heat wrapping those. Brake lines rerouted across the back. Throttle pedal and cable are in. I just need to pin that back, but that's all working. I've rewired the front fuse panel. So this fuse box now runs high beam and low beam headlights. It runs high and low thermo, and it runs the horn. The other big relay here just triggers the whole accessory section of that circuit, which will also turn on the driving lights, provide initial power to the electric power steering pump. The secondary stage of the electric power steering is triggered by the alternator. So when the engine fires up and the alternator light turns off, the power steering will fire up, which will be pretty cool. That all seems to be working. I had a bit of a drama with that because I wired that up, then my daily driver died and I had to do an engine swap on my daily driver, and then I forgot how I wired that up and proceeded to rewire the rest of the car in a completely different fashion. So I've rewired the whole car now, reusing a lot of wiring where I could, but replacing any Volvo plugs and running it how I'd like it to be done, getting rid of the Volvo fuse panel because it's garbage, and using fuse panels that use these blade style fuses and relays wherever I can. So that's done. I'll see if I can get a shot in there. Probably too dark to see, but it's all, yeah, it's too dark. There's a fuse panel inside on top of the transmission tunnel. This doesn't have any HVAC, no aircon, no heating, so it's a good spot for me to have that. And all the wiring's been rerun from there, so there's nothing sitting over the other side here where the fuse panel used to be. I've just got my wiring. It's not pinned in place yet. I'm not doing that until it all works. So yeah, there's that. I've moved on to wiring up the computer. I'm not made of money, so I'm going to use a standard LS computer with a bit of a twist. I'm using one from a 03 Suburban 5.3 litre. This is a green-blue PCM, called a P59, I think, as well. We didn't really have these here, apart from maybe on the VZ 5.7 litre Commodores in 2005, although I haven't verified that they can do everything that this one can. Chosen to use this particular PCM because it will allow me to use a cable throttle. So it has a driver for the idle air control motor, but it'll also allow me to use a flex fuel sensor. So I'm wiring the loom up from that, and I'm doing that backwards compared to how I would imagine most people do it. Typically what you do is you'd put your new wire in from the PCM end, run a fixed length, and then branch it out to do your rest of your loom. But that would require a pin kit for every GM connector that I need, and I don't want to spend that money when I already have the connectors from previously disassembled engines, and this is going to be much shorter than the factory loom. So what I've basically done is I've pulled back an original loom, rerouted it from the engine back to the cabin, and then chopped the loom at the length that is suitable for where the PCM will sit. I'm then going through and I'm splitting out the wires as I need them and identifying them with the multimeter, repinning them with the Delphi active, compatible pin for PCM, which I only need one tool for, which is that one, and plugging them in as required. So I've got most of the direct wires in here. I still have some more to go for the park reverse switch. I haven't traced those ones back because the plugs are glued in on these, so I left that one till last. And I also need to do my 2 main triggers, which is my crank angle sensor and my cam angle sensor. They've all been wired through in this loom, but let's see if I can find one to show. Yeah, probably not. Yeah. Yeah, you'll just have to take my word for it. No, there's one there. That's a crank angle sensor. To make sure I can get the best signal possible, I've used Tefcell wire for this, 3-core shielded wiring. So I've got, at this end, I've got this, and there's no way that's going to focus. Anyway, it's 3-core shielded wire, so I'm going to need to cut back the outer sheath, roll back the shielding, and then earth the shielding at this end, as well as pinning out the remaining wires. So those two in particular will have different, they'll have different wiring colours than the factory wiring. So I'm also running through, and I'm doing my spreadsheet over here. Just open that up, just to show what wiring will be. I've had to use I think it was a Chevy Express van wiring diagram and the original Holden one to work out which pins go where, and then fill in this table as we go. So I'm changing the circuit ideas to something that makes sense for me. They're not all going to be relevant, and correcting the wiring colouring as I go through. As I said, most of them are right, but not for that car. They're right for this side, which is your Holden, which is this wiring diagram, which is mostly the same. Pretty much the blue connectors are common between this style P59 PCM and the original. There's only a couple of wiring differences, but this is the blue-red wiring diagram, so the red connector is significantly different. So running through and making sure that I don't have anything that causes problems to hook that up. And I'm also converting, because this diagram's for a 4L60, changing it to a 4L80 at the same time. So there's a bit going on. We'll need a lot of testing before I can actually start plugging some sensors in, but I'm going to bench mount this, test it in place. Yeah, a bit more to go. I'm also planning on reusing one of these plugs here, which after a bit of researching I found is a Yazaki connector. Focus. There. It's a Yazaki connector. So it's got 4 heavier pins. It's a hybrid terminal. So the heavier pins will do my coil circuit power, my injector power, probably my wideband sensor power and an earth. And all the other ones will be signals for in between, like thermofan trigger, tacho, bunch of other things that need to go between the engine loom and the body loom. So I've just got some pins coming for those connectors, so I'm going to use those because they're in my ever-growing collection of cars that I've pulled apart and just saved things that might be useful later. And it is, because I haven't had to buy much of anything as far as wiring goes for this. Only the TEF cell 3-core and terminals. Oh, and these plugs. Because I didn't have a green connector, I needed these little caps. And it was most cost effective for me to buy a new connector with a full pin kit and the covers. That way I've got enough pins to do the whole lot. So they come with 80 pins, but it only uses really 40 per plug, so I'll have a few left in case I need to do any changes. But that's where I'm at with this. I'm hoping that I'll have this ready to power probably by next weekend, depending on how much free time I get to come out here and play. But yeah, that's that. To give example of how I'm tracing the wires, I'm at this one now that's highlighted here, row 142. It's the ignition control reference for bank 2, which in Australia is the driver's side bank. This diagram says it's a brown wire with a white stripe, and it's going to be pinned into green 61. It's not a brown wire with a white stripe in the loom I have. So if I go back to my wiring diagram for my original car that it came from, this is it, right bank, pin 4, ignition coil module reference low. So that's the same circuit. The circuit number is different and the colour is different. This is showing a V, which is a violet cable. It also shows that it's in pin 4, which is the outlier pin over here, the one that's got nothing underneath it. If I go back to my wiring harness, you see I've already identified the connector. I know which one's which by looking at it, because I know what else I've run down the same trunk. There's your violet wire. I've got my multimeter in place. So now it'll be just a matter of on my my buzzer circuit, just finding a purple wire and testing it. There's only a couple, so one of these, there's only two left by the look of it, so one of those two will be the wire I need. Once that's done, I lay it over its respective branch, be it either a blue connector or the green connector, and I cut it with about 3 centimeters extra wire from wherever the pin length is. So if it's this pin, for example, I'll come over 3 centimeters here, chop the wire off, bare the wire and crimp the pin there. That gives it enough to protrude through to the relevant length, and still have enough slack to match the length of the rest of the wires. Because you don't want one that's much longer, because it will just spiral around the loom when you wrap it. And if it's the shortest one, it will be the one that breaks once you put it in the car. So you want to keep them all pretty much the same, and then secure that wiring harness so it doesn't actually pull on any one particular wire. So I'll get that one in now. It's going into green 61, I think the diagram said, so I'll identify it, I'll bare it, I'll crimp it, and I'll resume the video. Okay, that's done. So it was actually the first purple wire I showed, the one that was hanging on the left here. So I've just verified that with the multimeter, cut it to length, crimped a pin on there with just my cheapo crimpers. They're relatively cheap, they do the job. I really like these crimpers. Pretty much everything on my car, short of the Deutsch connectors, has been crimped with those. The Deutsch are a barrel style, so they use a different crimper. But that's done, and then all I need to do is find pin 61, which is upside down and you may not be able to see. It's the first one after the screw there. Pop it in that hole, which I'm going to have to put the camera down to do because it's going to be a bit hard, but that's it. So you see the same wire for the other bank was pin 60, which is this brown wire. So I've already done that one. 61 goes there. Just keep doing that until there's none left. So I've probably got, I think probably about 15 wires left here that need to go into these connectors, and the rest will either be crimped into earth or ignition power, or go into the cabin via that other connector that I'll need to add. So I'm going to keep doing those. Okay, update time. I've gone ahead and done a bit more of the wiring. I've added in this plug, which I intended to use. I've just salvaged 2 of those from my collection and just put all of the pins in one connector. So I've got 24 available wires, 4 of high gauge. So for higher amperage connections, that's all in there. They've all been pinned through to the PCM where applicable, and some of the other wires run right through out to the main loom, like your starter motor connection, which is one of the higher amperage wires. These are left over. I still need to pin some other things in here from this loom. These are the leftover wires that I don't know what are. One of these, this one, will be power to one bank's coil and injectors. I cannot find one of the wires. So the green, which I think is the passenger side power, I can't find it unless it's this green one, but it's not testing okay. So unless it's broken somewhere in the loom, I'll need to test that. And the other one is one of these knock sensors, be it either this one or the other one that's somewhere else. I thought was on this blue wire, but again, it's not testing correctly, so that may be broken as well, or I haven't crimped it properly, but I'll have to go back and test that because that's not going to work for me. But that's it. This count is correct for what I'm missing, and there's 9 wires that come from the PNP switch, which is this one, I think, or this one. One of these two. One of these is a PNP switch, and one of these is a PRND switch. These are glued in from factory, so it's very hard to do a continuity test without actually poking a hole in the wire, which I don't want to do. So I was leaving them to last, and then any colours that matched would have to be right. But I think I'm going to get the heat gun out and actually melt that and test it properly, because I've got a freshly built transmission as well, and I don't need something that's inconsistent. I won't know if it's a wiring problem or a transmission problem, so I'll have to test it correctly. But that's where it's at. These ones over here, I know what they're for. They mostly need to be spliced together. Some of these are for extra things, like that's a wideband controller there. Power, blue and red is power for the wideband controller. I've got this orange wire, which is just a standalone wire that runs out here, which is going to go to a second engine temperature sensor, so the cluster will read correctly. So yeah, get in there. Okay, I'm all done. So that's every pin in the PCM done now. This plug's been fully pinned out, and this one here is the extension for the wideband. All runs through, there's no other plugs, so all the power and everything will be fed through there, and then everything else on the other side is engine. I did make 2 small mistakes, which I've gone through and fixed. The wire for one of the knock sensors didn't make it through the loom, so I've had to pull the tape off and fix that. And another wire which I made a mistake, which is the passenger side coil power. It wasn't long enough, because on the factory loom it ran the other way, and I've just pulled it back and ran it in line with the rest of the loom, but it actually stopped under one of my junction points, and I didn't realise it. So it was camouflaged under other wires, and I didn't realise I needed to extend it. So I've had to unwrap the loom again, find that, and extend it, and then pin it right through. So the way the factory coil and injector wiring is run, it's not one fuse for injectors and one fuse for coils. It's left bank and right bank individually fused. So I've done the same. So I've got one of these main pins in here. One of the big heavy ones is left bank and the other one's right bank. And then one of the other big ones in there is transmission power. So transmission to PCM. So yeah, looking pretty good. I'm not going to use these factory covers because they kind of expect the wiring to come out of the plug that way. And if I use them this way, it ends up pushing the wires in the middle, which is going to be really bad on the PCM. They're all going to be bunched up there and I won't be able to get to the bolts. So I don't need that. It's in the car anyway. It's all covered. I'll have a box, the actual lid of the PCM box in there, so that can go over there. I won't need any of those. I'm going to make a small patch loom on one of the female plugs of this, so I can actually bench test it. And I've just re-glued this plug back on because, yeah, I had to unwrap it and pull the wiring out, but it's just got some black elastic on there. That'll do, just to stop the fumes getting into the car. I had to cut that out because there was much more wire running through this plug than there is from factory, and there just wasn't room for it without cutting some of the plug out. So yeah, big mess, but looks like it's all done. I'll clean this up after the glue's had a chance to actually set, so I don't want to keep moving this around. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed my video. I will make another one next once it's actually in the car.